The roar of 1,000 cheering families was a soundproof wall around Chloe Beaumont. From the polished chrome of her wheelchair, she watched a sea of navy blue caps get tossed into the air, a constellation of fleeting dreams against the summer sky. Her own cap sat untouched in her lap. At her own university graduation, surrounded by the best and brightest, the daughter of one of the city's most powerful CEOs, was utterly devastatingly alone. Her mother, a titan of industry, watched from the VIP section, a chasm of unspoken words between them. But then through the crowd, a man in a faded polo shirt holding a young boy's hand started walking towards her. He wasn't a reporter or a dignitary. He was just a single dad. And he was about to change everything. The grounds of Northwood University were a symphony of celebration. Laughter bubbled up like champagne. Parents hugged their graduating children with tearful pride, and the air buzzed with the electric promise of the future. For most, it was a pinnacle moment, a triumphant end to a long, arduous journey. For Chloe Beaumont, it felt like standing on that pinnacle with her feet shackled to the ground. Her wheelchair was parked on a small, designated patch of concrete just off the main lawn, a space that was supposed to be for convenience, but felt more like a quarantine zone. She watched her classmates, people she'd shared lectures and libraries with for 4 years, merge into joyful, impenetrable clusters. They took selfies, their arms slung around each other, their faces bright with achievement. Chloe's phone remained dark in her purse. There was no one to take a picture with. She adjusted the lightweight cashmere blanket over her legs, a familiar, futile gesture. The accident had taken more than just the use of her legs. It had stolen the casual, thoughtless ease of youth. It had built invisible walls around her that were far more confining than the physical ones. From the elevated VIP seating, her mother, Victoria Beaumont, watched her with an expression as sharp and unreadable as cut glass. Victoria was the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, a technology empire she had built from the ground up after her husband's death. She was a legend in the business world, a woman known for her ruthless efficiency and her visionary intellect. She wore a tailored cream-colored suit that cost more than the first car of any graduate on the field. Her posture was perfect, her grief and her love locked away behind a formidable facade. Victoria's gaze was fixed on Chloe, a turbulent storm of pride, pain, and suffocating guilt swirling within her. This day was a testament to Chloe's resilience. A magna cum laude degree in art history, achieved through years of grueling physical therapy, painful surgeries, and the quiet, lonely work of studying when others were out living. Victoria had provided everything money could buy: the best doctors, a fully accessible home, a custom van, round-the-clock nursing care. She had paved a smooth road for Chloe's wheelchair, but she had forgotten how to walk alongside her. The accident that had paralyzed Chloe had also killed her father, Robert. It was Victoria who had been driving. A rainy night, a moment of distraction, arguing about a business deal, the sickening screech of tires. The memory was a ghost that lived in their sprawling, silent mansion. Victoria had thrown herself into her work building, an empire as a monument to her husband and a fortress for her daughter. But the fortress had become a prison of sorts, isolating them both. She knew how to close a billion-dollar deal, but she no longer knew how to talk to her own child about the ache in her heart. As the crowd began to thin, families heading off to celebratory lunches and dinners, Chloe's isolation became starker. Her nurse, a kind but professional woman named Helen, stood a respectful distance away, waiting for the signal to leave. Victoria was descending from the VIP section, her phone already pressed to her ear, as she dealt with some corporate fire. That's when Chloe saw them. A man and a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, weaving through the remaining people. The man had kind eyes crinkled at the corners and the sturdy build of someone who worked with their hands. He wore simple jeans and a polo shirt that had seen better days. The boy, clutching a small bouquet of grocery store daisies, had a gap-toothed grin and was practically bouncing with excitement. They were clearly looking for someone. The boy, whose name was Owen, spotted Chloe first. He tugged on his dad's hand. "Dad, look. She's all alone." The man, Daniel Peterson, followed his son's gaze. He saw the expensive-looking wheelchair, the designer dress, the perfect hair. He also saw the profound loneliness in the young woman's eyes. It was a look he recognized. He had been a single father since Owen's mother left when he was 2, and he knew what it was to feel like you were on the outside, looking in. "Maybe her family is just running late," Daniel murmured, not wanting to stare. "But her hat is in her lap," Owen insisted, with the simple, irrefutable logic of a child. "Everyone else threw theirs, and she's not smiling." Before Daniel could stop him, Owen broke away and walked right up to Chloe's wheelchair. Daniel's heart did a nervous flip-flop. You didn't just approach people like that, especially not people who so clearly belonged to a different world. Owen stopped a few feet from Chloe, looking suddenly shy. "Hi," he said, holding out the slightly wilting daisies. "Congratulations. My cousin graduated today, but we can't find him. These are for you, I guess, until we do." Chloe stared at the boy, then at the flowers, completely taken aback. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. People didn't just talk to her. They talked around her to her nurse, or they offered pitying smiles and hurried away. Daniel rushed over his face, flushed with embarrassment. "Owen, I am so sorry," he said, directing his words to Chloe. He has a big heart, and not a lot of breaks. I'm so sorry to bother you." Chloe found her voice. It was a little rusty from disuse. "It's okay," she said, a genuine, hesitant smile touching her lips for the first time all day. She looked at Owen. "Thank you. They're beautiful." She reached out and took the small bouquet. Her fingers brushed against his, and the simple human contact was like a jolt of electricity. "See, Dad, she likes them," Owen said triumphantly. Just then, Victoria Beaumont arrived. Her phone call finished her CEO mask firmly in place. She saw a strange man and a child bothering her daughter, and her entire demeanor became glacial. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice low and laced with steel. Daniel immediately straightened up, intimidated by the sheer force of her presence. "No, ma'am. Not at all. My son was We were just congratulating your daughter. We'll get out of your way." He put a hand on Owen's shoulder, ready to steer him away. But Chloe spoke up, her voice stronger than before. "Mum, it's fine. He was being nice." She looked down at the daisies in her hand, their humble cheerfulness a stark contrast to the perfect, scentless orchids that filled her room at home. For the first time all day, she felt a flicker of warmth, a connection, however fleeting, to the joyful chaos around her. And in that moment, 3 lives, previously running on entirely separate tracks, had irrevocably and unknowingly intersected. The drive back to the Beaumont estate was thick with the usual silence. The custom Mercedes-Benz glided through the city streets, its hushed interior a world away from the boisterous campus they had just left. Helen the nurse sat in the front passenger seat, while Victoria drove with focused, competent hands. In the spacious back, Chloe sat secured in her wheelchair, the small bouquet of daisies resting in her lap. Their vibrant common yellow was an anomaly in the landscape of muted grey leather and polished wood grain. Victoria glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Chloe was staring out the window, but her gaze seemed distant. Victoria's mind raced, toggling between a pending merger in Singapore and the unsettling image of that man, that stranger approaching her vulnerable daughter. Her protective instincts, always on high alert, had flared violently. She saw a scruffy man, a potential threat, a grifter looking for an opportunity. She didn't see what Chloe had seen. "I've arranged a private dinner at Jean-Georges tonight to celebrate," Victoria announced, her tone more like a scheduling confirmation than a warm invitation. "Just the two of us." Chloe didn't turn from the window. "I'm tired, Mum. I'd rather just stay home." A familiar pang of frustration hit Victoria. She had moved mountains to secure a last-minute reservation at the city's most exclusive restaurant. She was trying. Wasn't she providing the best, was her way of loving? Why couldn't Chloe see that? It's your graduation, Chloe. It deserves to be celebrated properly. "This morning was the celebration," Chloe said quietly. The unspoken words hung in the air. "And you were on your phone for half of it." Victoria tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Fine. I'll have Chef Antoine prepare something special at the house." The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they arrived at the sprawling modern mansion that felt more like a private museum than a home, the automated gates swept open to reveal meticulously manicured lawns. A small staff was waiting to assist. Helen and another aide helped Chloe out of the van and into the house. Victoria followed them in her mind, already shifting back to the Singapore deal. But as she walked past the living room, a cavernous space with minimalist furniture and a singular massive abstract painting, she saw Chloe by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had asked Helen for a vase, a simple glass tumbler from the kitchen, not one of the priceless crystal pieces from the display cabinet. She was carefully arranging the 7 scraggly daisies. Victoria stopped in the doorway, unseen. She watched her daughter's delicate, focused movements. Chloe, who showed interest in almost nothing beyond her books, was tending to these cheap flowers as if they were rare orchids. Later that evening, after a tense and largely silent dinner, Chloe was in her room. Victoria knocked softly on the open door. "Chloe." Chloe was at her desk, her laptop open. The daisies sat in their tumbler on her bedside table, a small stubborn spot of colour in the immaculately designed, sterile room. "The man from this morning," Victoria began, choosing her words carefully, "and his boy. It was inappropriate for them to approach you like that." Chloe finally looked at her mother, her expression guarded. "They were just being kind. The boy's name is Owen. Kindness from strangers is often a mask for something else," Victoria said, the hard-won cynicism of her world colouring her words. "People see our name. They see an opportunity." A flash of anger, rare and startling, lit Chloe's eyes. "Or maybe they just see a person, Mum. A person who looked lonely. Maybe they were just being human." The accusation stung more than Victoria would ever admit. "I just want you to be safe." "I know," Chloe said, her voice softening, the anger receding into her usual quiet resignation. "He said his name was Daniel Peterson. He's a carpenter." She said it so simply, but the information hung in the air. A carpenter. It only confirmed Victoria's suspicions. A working-class man, probably struggling seeing the Beaumont name as a lottery ticket. "How do you know that?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp. "I asked him," Chloe replied, turning back to her computer. "While you were on your phone." The conversation was over. Chloe had retreated back behind her walls, but Victoria couldn't let it go. She was unsettled not just by the man, but by Chloe's reaction. It was the most animated she had seen her daughter in months. That night, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She used her company's formidable resources for a personal matter. She didn't launch a full-scale private investigation, not yet. She just asked her head of security, a discreet man named Peterson, to run a simple public record search on one Daniel Peterson, carpenter. She told herself it was just for due diligence, for safety. The report came back the next morning. It was disappointingly normal. Daniel Peterson, tattoo owner of a small independent contracting business, Peterson Woodcrafts. He lived in a modest suburb 2 towns over. No criminal record. A clean driving history. Divorced. Sole custody of his son, Owen, age 8. The only red flag, if you could even call it that, was a business loan he was still paying off and a credit score that was decent, but not stellar. He was by all accounts an ordinary, hard-working, single father. Victoria stared at the file, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. There was no scam, no hidden agenda. Which meant Chloe was right. It had just been a simple act of human kindness. The thought was so foreign in Victoria's transactional world that it felt like a language she didn't speak. A few days later, Chloe was unusually quiet. She had barely touched her food and spent most of her time in her room. Helen pulled Victoria aside one afternoon. "She's been asking about the boy," Helen said gently. "Owen. She asked if there was any way to thank him for the flowers." Victoria's first instinct was to say no, to shut it down. It was a risk, an unknown variable in the carefully controlled equation of Chloe's life. But then she pictured Chloe's face at the graduation, the flicker of a genuine smile. She thought of her daughter's accusation. Maybe they just see a person. Mom. Perhaps for once, she needed to stop mitigating risk and take a chance. Victoria was a woman of action. If she was going to do this, she would do it on her terms in a controlled environment. She looked at the report on her desk. Peterson Woodcrafts. An idea audacious and a little manipulative began to form in her mind. Their estate had a large stone patio that was beautiful but utterly impractical for a wheelchair. For years she had meant to have a series of elegant, accessible ramps and a raised garden bed built. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Peterson Woodcrafts. She would create a reason for Daniel Peterson to be in their lives, a business transaction that she understood, that she could control. Daniel Peterson was sanding a reclaimed oak beam in his workshop when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar with a prestigious city prefix. He almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a sales call, but something made him answer. "Peterson Woodcrafts, Daniel speaking." "Mr. Peterson," a crisp, commanding voice said. "This is Victoria Beaumont." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. The name hit him like a physical blow. The CEO, the woman from the graduation. His mind immediately replayed the scene, the embarrassment, her icy glare. He was sure she was calling to threaten him with a lawsuit for harassing her daughter. "Ma'am," he stammered. "Listen, about the other day, I am so incredibly sorry. My son, I'm not calling about that." Victoria cut him off, though her tone didn't get any warmer. "I'm calling because I require your services. I understand you specialize in custom woodwork. I need a series of accessible ramps and a raised garden designed and built for my property. My personal assistant will send you the address. I'd like you to come by tomorrow at 10 to assess the project and provide a quote." Daniel was floored into silence. He looked around his dusty workshop, a chaotic but organized space filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. It was his sanctuary, but it was a world away from what he imagined a Beaumont property to be. He built kitchen cabinets, bookshelves and decks for middle-class families. This was a different league entirely. "Mr. Peterson, are you there?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm here," he said, shaking his head to clear it. "Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there." The next day, as Daniel pulled his slightly beat-up work truck up to the Beaumont estate, he felt like he had taken a wrong turn into a different dimension. The gates were imposing works of art The driveway was longer than the entire street he lived on. He parked where the assistant instructed, next to a fleet of luxury cars in a garage that was bigger than his house. Victoria met him on the back patio, dressed in sharp trousers and a silk blouse, looking every bit the corporate powerhouse. She was professional direct and treated him with a cool politeness that felt like a force field. She walked him through her vision for the project, pointing out angles and materials using architectural terms with fluent ease. There was no mention of the graduation, no mention of Chloe. This was strictly business. Daniel in his element, talking about wood and joinery and weight distribution, slowly regained his confidence. He took measurements, sketched ideas in his notepad, and spoke about the pros and cons of cedar versus composite materials. He noticed how she listened, really listened, absorbing the details, asking intelligent questions. She was formidable. As he was about to leave, a door slid open, and Chloe appeared guided by her nurse. She was wearing simple leggings and a soft sweater, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm so glad you're here. Please call me Daniel," he said, a warm, genuine smile, replacing his professional demeanor. "It's good to see you again, Chloe." Victoria watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. Chloe had some thoughts on the design for the raised garden. She stated, making it sound like a line item on a project brief. Chloe navigated her wheelchair over to Daniel's side. "I was hoping it could be built at a height I could work at," she said, a hint of shy excitement in her voice. "I used to love gardening with my dad." The mention of her father hung in the air for a moment. Daniel saw a flicker of pain in Victoria's eyes before it was extinguished. "Of course," Daniel said, kneeling down to be at her eye level, a gesture of respect that was so natural he didn't even think about it. "We can design it exactly to the height of your chair, with space underneath so you can get right up to it. We can even put in a built-in irrigation system to make watering easier." For the next 10 minutes, Daniel and Chloe talked about the garden. He didn't talk down to her or treat her with kid gloves. He treated her like the client, asking her what kind of flowers she liked, whether she preferred herbs or vegetables, and sketching out her ideas. Victoria stood back and observed. She saw her daughter engaged, expressive and happy in a way she hadn't been in years. She saw a man who treated Chloe not as a fragile object of pity, but as a person with ideas and desires. It was both a relief and a stab to the heart. Why could this stranger connect with her daughter so easily when she couldn't? Daniel got the job. He started work the following week. He insisted on working alone, saying he preferred to handle his custom projects personally. The first few days, Victoria kept her distance, observing him from her home office window. He was a meticulous craftsman, his movements efficient and precise. Owen started coming with him after school. Daniel had cleared it with Victoria's assistant, explaining that he was a single dat and his after-school care was limited. Victoria agreed with the stipulation that Owen was to stay in the work area. But that rule was broken on the second day. Chloe, who had been watching from her window, came out to the patio. Soon Owen, a bundle of relentless energy and curiosity, was showing her a video game on his tablet. Chloe, an avid reader who usually disdained screens, was laughing at his commentary. Their friendship blossomed with incredible speed. Owen was completely unfazed by the wheelchair. To him it was just a different kind of chair. He'd sit on the footrest and tell her about his day, his friends, his latest scheme to build a rocket in his backyard. Chloe in turn would help him with his reading homework, patiently sounding out difficult words. Daniel and Victoria maintained their professional distance. They had brief, polite conversations about the project's progress. But Victoria found herself watching him more and more. She watched him with his son, the easy affection, the patient way he answered a million questions, the firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. It was a language of parenting she had forgotten how to speak, if she ever knew it at all. Her parenting had become about management, logistics, and protection. His was about presence. One afternoon she walked out with 2 glasses of iced tea. Daniel was making a complex cut with a handsaw, sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't use a power saw for that?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. He looked up, surprised by her presence. "Not for this kind of finish work," he said, wiping his brow. "A handsaw gives you more control. It's slower, but the result is cleaner. Some things just can't be rushed." His words resonated with her more than he could ever know. Her entire life was about speed efficiency and rushing to the next goal. She had tried to rush Chloe's healing, to rush their family's recovery from grief. Maybe some things, the most important things, couldn't be rushed. She looked over at the nearly completed ramp, its gentle slope and smooth cedar planks, a testament to his skill. Then she looked at Chloe and Owen sitting in the shade heads, bent together over a book. For the first time in a very long time, the cavernous empty space of the Beaumont estate felt a little bit like a home, and the feeling was both wonderful and terrifying. As the weeks passed, Daniel Peterson became a quiet, steady fixture at the Beaumont estate. The ramps were completed, their beautiful functional design seamlessly integrating with the house's modern architecture. The raised garden bed was now a sturdy, inviting structure waiting for soil and plants. Chloe had already ordered dozens of seed catalogues and spent hours planning her garden, a spark of passion Victoria hadn't seen in her since before the accident. The unlikely friendship between Chloe and Owen had become the highlight of Chloe's days. Victoria would often see them from her office window, Owen pushing Chloe's wheelchair in a race down the new ramp, their laughter echoing across the manicured lawn. The sound was a balm to Victoria's soul, but it also pricked at her conscience. She was the one who was supposed to be making her daughter laugh. A fragile truce had formed between Victoria and Daniel. Their conversations were still mostly about the project, but the icy formality had thawed slightly. She found herself asking about his business, and he in turn asked about Chloe's art history studies. They were 2 single parents from vastly different worlds orbiting the quiet sun of their children's happiness. But a storm was gathering on the horizon, and its name was Geoffrey Beaumont. Geoffrey was Victoria's brother-in-law, her late husband, Robert's younger brother. He held a senior position at Innovate Dynamics, a role he'd been given out of family obligation rather than merit. He was charming on the surface, but underneath lay a deep-seated resentment. He believed that he, a Beaumont by blood, should have been given control of the company after Robert's death, not Victoria. He viewed her success as a personal affront, a theft of his birthright. Geoffrey made it a point to come for dinner once a month, a tradition Victoria tolerated for the sake of family harmony. During one of these dinners he saw Daniel packing up his tools for the day with Owen trailing behind him. "Who's the handyman?" Geoffrey asked, a slight sneer in his voice as he swirled the expensive wine in his glass. "He's a contractor, Geoffrey. He built the new ramps for Chloe," Victoria replied coolly. "He seems to have made himself quite at home," Geoffrey observed, watching, as Chloe waved goodbye to Daniel and Owen from the patio. "And Chloe seems quite taken with him, and his son. They've become friends," Victoria said, a defensive edge to her tone. Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. He saw a threat, but also an opportunity. An unvetted working-class man ingratiating himself with his emotionally vulnerable niece and his powerful widowed sister-in-law. It was the perfect leverage. "I'm just concerned, Victoria," he said, his voice a mask of faux sincerity. "A woman in your position, a girl in Chloe's, you can't be too careful. People like that, they can be opportunistic. You don't really know anything about him, do you? His words were a poisoned dart aimed directly at Victoria's deepest fears. She had already done a background check, of course, but Geoffrey's insinuation reignited her dormant anxiety. "I know he's a good craftsman and a kind father." She said more to convince herself than him. "Of course," Geoffrey said smoothly, backing off. "I'm sure you've been thorough. I just worry." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next week, Geoffrey began his insidious campaign. He used his own resources, far shadier and more invasive than Victoria's professional security team, to dig into Daniel's life. He wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for anything that could be twisted into a weapon. And he found it. Years ago, Daniel had tried to expand his business. He'd partnered with a friend, taken out a significant loan, and opened a second workshop. The partner turned out to be a crook, embezzling funds and leaving Daniel with a mountain of debt and a failed business. Daniel had spent the next 5 years working tirelessly, paying back every cent and slowly rebuilding his reputation on his own. It was a story of resilience and integrity. But in Geoffrey's hands, it became a story of failure, incompetence, and financial desperation. He compiled a dossier, carefully omitting the parts about the fraudulent partner and Daniel's diligent repayment of the debt. What was left was a picture of a man whose business had collapsed, who was deep in debt, and who was likely looking for a wealthy savior. He chose his moment carefully. He found Victoria in her office, late one evening, poring over quarterly reports. He placed a sleek black folder on her desk. "Victoria," he said, his voice grave. "I told you I was worried. I did some digging on our Mr. Peterson. I think you need to see this." Victoria's blood ran cold. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, the dissolution of Daniel's former business bank statements, showing the massive loan, a credit report, highlighting the years of bad debt. It was a brutally effective, curated selection of half-truths. "His last business went bankrupt," Geoffrey said, narrating the lie. "He was left with nothing. He's been struggling ever since. And then he just happens to show up at Chloe's graduation. Convenient, don't you think?" Every fear Victoria had ever harbored came rushing to the surface. The fear of being taken advantage of her wealth, being a target, of someone trying to use her daughter to get to her. She remembered Daniel's slightly worn clothes, his old truck, his initial nervousness. It all clicked into a terrifying false narrative. "He's been playing you, Victoria." Geoffrey pressed, seeing the doubt in her eyes. "He's using his son to get to Chloe, and using Chloe to get to you and the Beaumont fortune. It's a classic long con." The thought of someone manipulating her daughter's fragile happiness for financial gain was abhorrent. It ignited a cold, protective rage within her. The tentative trust she had started to build with Daniel shattered into a million pieces. The laughter she'd heard, the kindness she'd witnessed, it all seemed like a calculated performance now. "Thank you, Geoffrey," she said, her voice dangerously quiet as she closed the folder. "I'll handle this." He smiled, Victor's thin, cruel smile. "I knew you'd see reason. I'm just looking out for this family." As he left, Victoria sat alone in the vast silence of her office, the folder in front of her like a verdict. The warmth that had begun to seep into her home felt like a trick, a deception. And she, Victoria Beaumont, the CEO who could spot a flaw in a business plan from a mile away, had fallen for it. She would not let it continue for one more day. She would protect her daughter, no matter who she had to hurt in the process. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear, but a storm was brewing inside the Beaumont mansion. Victoria had barely slept, Geoffrey's twisted words replaying in her mind, morphing Daniel's kindness into a sinister charade. She saw every smile, every polite conversation, every moment of connection through the distorted lens of deceit. Daniel arrived at his usual time, whistling softly as he unloaded a flat of young lavender plants for the new garden. Owen was at school, and Chloe was waiting on the patio, a book of garden designs in her lap. The scene which would have warmed Victoria's heart just 2 days ago now looked staged and predatory. Victoria walked onto the patio, her posture rigid, her face an emotionless mask. She was holding a check. "Chloe, would you mind going inside for a moment? I need to speak with Mr. Peterson privately," she said. Her tone was flat, leaving no room for argument. Chloe looked from her mother's stony expression to Daniel's quizzical one. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. "Is everything okay?" "Go inside, Chloe," Victoria repeated, her voice a little sharper. Reluctantly, Chloe guided her wheelchair back into the house, casting a worried glance over her shoulder. Once she was gone, Victoria faced Daniel. The silence stretched heavy and uncomfortable. Daniel finally broke it. "Is there a problem with the work, Miss Beaumont?" "The work is fine," she said, her voice like ice. "This, however, is not." She extended the check towards him. "This is a payment for the remainder of your contract, plus a generous bonus for your time. Your services are no longer required." Daniel stared at the check, then at her face, utterly bewildered. I don't understand. We were supposed to plant the garden today. Chloe was so excited." "Chloe will be fine," Victoria snapped. "I think you've spent quite enough time with my daughter." The penny dropped. This wasn't about the work. This was personal. "What is this about?" Daniel asked, his voice low, a hint of a tremor from shock and a rising sense of indignation. Victoria's control finally slipped, and the cold fury she'd been nursing all night spilled out. "I know about your failed business, Mr. Peterson. I know about your debts. Do you take me for a fool? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Daniel's face went pale, then flushed with a deep, angry red. He felt exposed, violated. "My past business has nothing to do with this. I paid back every cent of that debt. It took me years, but I did it." "How noble!" Victoria sneered, her words dripping with sarcasm. "But it must be so much easier to find a wealthy widow to solve your financial problems for you. Was that the plan? Send your sweet little boy over at the graduation to soften us up. Use my lonely, vulnerable daughter as a stepping stone to the family fortune." Each word was a physical blow. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. The accusation was so monstrous, so far from the truth that he couldn't even formulate a defense at first. He looked at this powerful, beautiful, and profoundly broken woman and saw nothing but fear and prejudice. "You think—" He started, his voice thick with disbelief and hurt. "You think that's what this was? My son saw a girl who looked sad and wanted to give her his flowers. That's it. That's all it ever was." "Oh, please spare me the fairy tale," Victoria shot back. "I live in the real world, where men like you look for opportunities, not friendships." That was the final straw. Daniel's shock hardened into a cold, quiet dignity. He looked at the check still in her hand, as if it were something vile. "You can keep your money," he said, his voice steady, despite the rage churning inside him. "I'll send you a final invoice for the hours I've worked. Nothing more." He turned and began packing his tools, his movements sharp and precise. Every clank of metal on metal was an exclamation point to the end of their fragile connection. "I thought you were starting to see me, Miss Beaumont," he said, his back still to her. "The real me. But you never did. You just saw a project then, a threat. You never saw a person. He paused, his hand on the handle of his toolbox. And you don't see your daughter either. You see a liability to be managed. That girl in there deserves a mother. All you're giving her is a warden. He picked up his tools and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Victoria standing on the patio, the check still in her hand, his final words echoing in the silent, sunlit air. From her window, Chloe had seen it all. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the confrontation, her mother's rigid posture, Daniel's shocked expression, and his final resolute departure. When her mother came back inside, her face a mask of cold triumph, Chloe knew. "What did you do?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "I did what was necessary to protect you," Victoria said, her CEO voice in full command. "He was a fraud, Chloe. He was using you." "No," Chloe whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "No, he wasn't. He was my friend. Owen was my friend. They were the first people who didn't look at me and see this." She gestured angrily at her wheelchair. "They just saw me." "You're naive," Victoria said, her voice hard, trying to force her daughter to accept her version of reality. "You don't understand how the world works." "No, Mom, you don't." Chloe's voice rose to a shout, a sound so rare it made the crystal on the shelves seem to vibrate. "You live in a world of threats and balance sheets. You don't live in the human world anymore." "Daniel was kind. Owen made me laugh. And you drove them away because you can't stand to see anyone get close to me. You can't stand to see me happy unless you're the one controlling it." The accusation, so close to what Daniel had said, finally cracked Victoria's armor. But before she could respond, Chloe had turned her wheelchair around her movements, jerky with rage and grief. "Leave me alone," she sobbed, wheeling herself into her room and slamming the door shut with a resounding crack that echoed through the enormous empty house. Victoria stood alone in the living room, surrounded by priceless art and designer furniture. The silence that descended was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. It was the sound of failure. She had won the battle she had manufactured in her own mind, but in doing so, she had just declared a devastating war on her own daughter's heart. The days that followed the confrontation were the most suffocating Victoria had ever experienced. The silence in the mansion returned, but it was different now. It was a heavy, mournful silence, punctuated by the quiet sobs she sometimes heard from behind Chloe's closed door. Chloe refused to leave her room for anything other than absolute necessities. She didn't read her gardening books. They were stacked in a corner, ignored. She didn't answer her mother's questions with more than a single clipped word. She ate little her meals, often returning to the kitchen untouched. The light that Daniel and Owen had ignited in her had been extinguished, and in its place was a profound, despairing darkness that frightened Victoria more than any corporate threat. Victoria tried to justify her actions. She had been protecting her daughter. It was what any parent would do. She reread the file Jeffrey had given her, searching for confirmation that she had done the right thing. But now, without the heat of her anger, the curated half-truths seemed flimsy. The narrative felt forced. Her resolve began to crumble when Helen the nurse approached her. One evening, her professional demeanor strained with concern. "Miss Beaumont," she began hesitantly. "I know it's not my place, but Chloe, she isn't getting better. She's despondent. She told me yesterday that she finally understood what it felt like to be a prisoner. Not because of her chair, but because of this house." The word prisoner struck Victoria like a physical blow. It was the echo of Daniel's parting shot. All you're giving her is a warden. Was that what she had become? That night, unable to sleep, Victoria walked past Chloe's room and saw the light on under the door. She heard a tiny muffled sound and pressed her ear against the cool wood. Chloe was talking to someone. Victoria's heart seized. Was she on the phone with him? But as she listened, she realized Chloe was looking at a picture on her tablet, a photo Owen had shown her of his dog, a scruffy terrier named Buster. She was whispering to the picture. "I hope your dad is okay, Owen. I hope you're okay. I miss you." The raw, innocent grief in her daughter's voice shattered the last of Victoria's defenses. She had not protected her daughter. She had wounded her more deeply than anyone else ever could. The problem wasn't Daniel Peterson. The problem was her, and the information she had acted on had come from Jeffrey. A new cold suspicion began to form in Victoria's mind. Jeffrey had always been resentful. He had always played games of manipulation in the corporate world. What if this was just another one of his games? The next morning, Victoria Beaumont, the CEO, resurfaced with a vengeance. But this time, her target wasn't a competitor. It was her own family. She didn't call Jeffrey. Instead, she called Mark Peterson, her long-serving and incredibly discreet head of security. He was an ex-intelligence officer who could find a needle in a digital haystack. "Mark," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "I need you to do a full deep-dive investigation into Daniel Peterson. Everything. Business records, personal life, the works. I want the complete picture, not just a summary. And while you're at it," she added, her voice dropping, "I want you to run a covert forensic audit on my brother-in-law, Jeffrey Beaumont. Check his company emails, his financial transfers, his phone records. I want to know everything he's been doing for the past 6 months. And Mark, be invisible." For the next 48 hours, Victoria ran her company on autopilot, while a storm of digital investigation churned beneath the surface. Mark's report on Daniel Peterson came first. It was delivered in a sealed, encrypted file. As Victoria read it, her heart sank with shame. It detailed the story of Daniel's first business, but this time it included the court documents proving his partner's fraud. It showed the systematic repayment of the loan with glowing letters of recommendation from the bank manager who had overseen the process, praising Daniel's integrity. It included testimonials from dozens of clients who called him an honest, hard-working craftsman. It even had a note from Owen's school principal commending his active role as a parent volunteer. He wasn't a predator. He was a good man. A man she had slandered and humiliated. The second report, the one on Jeffrey, arrived a day later. It was a bomb. Mark had uncovered a systematic campaign of sabotage. Jeffrey had been secretly communicating with a rival tech firm, leaking sensitive information about Innovate Dynamics' upcoming product launches. He had been siphoning small, untraceable amounts of money from departmental budgets into offshore accounts. Most damning of all were the emails between Jeffrey and a private investigator. They detailed the plan to dig up anything we can use on Daniel Peterson and to frame it in the worst possible light to spook Victoria and get the construction worker out of the picture. The final email sent the night before Jeffrey gave her the dossier read, "She's isolated again. Perfect. Phase 1 complete. Now we wait for her to lean on family. On me." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it took Victoria's breath away. Jeffrey hadn't just been trying to get rid of Daniel. He had been actively isolating her, preying on her fears, and trying to destabilize her so he could make a move to seize control of the company she and Robert had built. He had used her love for her daughter as a weapon against her. The fury that filled Victoria was cold, precise, and absolute. The grieving widow and the fearful mother were gone. In their place was the titan of industry who had crushed competitors and built an empire. Jeffrey had made a fatal error. He had forgotten who exactly he was dealing with. But before she could bring her wrath down upon him, she had to do something far more difficult. She had to face the wreckage she had created in her own home and in the life of an innocent man. She had to apologize. The drive to Daniel Peterson's house was the longest of Victoria's life. She wasn't in her chauffeured Mercedes, but in her own personal sedan, a car she rarely drove. She needed the control, the focus. She had the address memorized. It was a small blue bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street, a world away from her gated estate. A well-used bicycle was propped against the porch railing, and a lovingly tended vegetable patch dominated the small front yard. It was the picture of a modest, happy home. It was everything her mansion was not. For a full minute, she just sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Apologizing did not come naturally to her. In her world, an apology was an admission of weakness, a concession of leverage. But this wasn't business. This was about basic human decency. Taking a deep breath, she got out of the car. She walked up the short concrete path and knocked on the door. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Daniel opened it, and his face went through a rapid series of emotions, surprise, then confusion, then a shuttered, defensive coldness. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, and his hands were smudged with dirt from the garden. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice flat. He made no move to invite her in. "Daniel," she said his name, feeling foreign and clumsy on her tongue. "May I please have a moment of your time? It's important." He hesitated, his jaw tight. He wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her to get off his property and out of his life. But then he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not arrogance or suspicion, but a deep, genuine shame. He sighed and stepped back, holding the door open. "You have 5 minutes." The inside of his house was warm and lived in. A half-finished puzzle was on the coffee table, and drawings were stuck to the refrigerator with cartoon magnets. Owen was nowhere to be seen, likely in his room. Victoria stood awkwardly in the entryway, not feeling worthy of stepping further into this space. "I came here," she began, her voice unsteady, "to offer you my most profound and sincere apology. What I said to you, what I accused you of, was unforgivable." Daniel just watched her. His arms crossed his expression, unyielding. "I was given information, false, manipulated information about your past," she continued, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "And instead of trusting my own judgment, instead of trusting the man I had seen be so kind to my daughter, I let my own fears and prejudices take over. There is no excuse for my behavior. It was cruel and it was wrong." She paused, taking another shaky breath. "I read the truth about what happened with your old business. I know that you are a man of integrity and honor, an integrity I failed to show you. You were right. I didn't see you. I saw a stereotype, a threat, and I am so sorry for the pain I caused you and your son." Daniel's rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. He had not expected this. He had expected lawyers or perhaps a revised check sent by a courier. He had not expected Victoria Beaumont, humbled and shamefaced, standing on his doorstep. "And Chloe," he asked, his voice still hard, "does she know you're here?" "No," Victoria admitted, her voice cracking slightly. She's heartbroken. Because of what I did. I destroyed her first real friendship in years. I hurt her more deeply than I think I've ever hurt anyone. I came here first because I owe you the apology, but also because I don't know how to fix what I've broken with her." The admission of helplessness, coming from this incredibly powerful woman, was what finally broke through his anger. He saw her not as a CEO but as a terrified mother who had made a terrible mistake. "She's a strong kid," he said, his voice softening. "She'll forgive you. But you have to be honest with her, all the way." At that moment, Owen appeared in the hallway holding his tablet. "Dad, the Wi-Fi's out again." He stopped dead when he saw Victoria. He looked from her to his father, his young face full of confusion and a little bit of fear. Victoria's heart ached. She knelt down just as Daniel had done with Chloe at their first meeting. "Hello, Owen," she said softly. "I'm the person who was very unfair to your dad. I made a big mistake, and I hurt his feelings, and I'm here to say that I'm sorry. I miss seeing you at my house, and Chloe misses you very much." Owen looked at his dad, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Owen then looked back at Victoria. "Chloe's sad." "Yes," Victoria said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "Very sad. Because of me." Owen walked over and with the simple, uncomplicated grace of a child patted her on the shoulder. "It's okay," he said. "My dad says everyone makes mistakes." The simple act of forgiveness from this little boy was more than Victoria could bear. She finally let out a choked sob, years of pent-up grief and fear and loneliness pouring out of her. The next day, Victoria dealt with Jeffrey. There was no dramatic confrontation. She called an emergency board meeting. When Jeffrey walked in, confident and smiling, he found Victoria at the head of the table, flanked by the company's legal counsel. In front of every board member was a folder containing the irrefutable proof of his corporate espionage and financial crimes. He was fired, stripped of his severance, and informed that Innovate Dynamics would be pursuing full criminal charges. He was escorted from the building by security, his empire of resentment and deceit crumbling to dust. But that was the easy part. The hard part was waiting at home. Victoria found Chloe on the patio, staring blankly at the unfinished empty garden box. Victoria sat down, not in a chair opposite her, but on the ground next to her wheelchair. And for the first time since the accident, she told Chloe everything. Not just about Jeffrey's lies and her apology to Daniel, but about the accident. About the guilt she carried every single day. About how her fear of failing as a protector had turned her into a warden. She wept not as a CEO, but as a mother who had lost her way. Chloe listened silently, tears rolling down her own cheeks. When Victoria was finished, her story told her soul laid bare. Chloe reached out and placed her hand on her mother's. "I miss Dad too," Chloe whispered. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. It was the first plank in a new foundation. A week later, a familiar, slightly beat-up truck pulled up the long driveway. Daniel and Owen got out, carrying 2 large flats of strawberry plants and a bag of potting soil. Chloe was waiting for them on the patio, a true, radiant smile on her face. Victoria watched from a distance, giving them their space. She watched as Daniel showed Chloe how to place the young plants in the soil, his large, capable hands guiding her smaller ones. She watched Owen chatter away, making Chloe laugh, a real unburdened laugh. Later, Victoria brought out lemonade and sat with them. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't a fairy tale. The damage had left scars. But as she sat there in the warm afternoon sun, listening to the easy conversation and the sound of her daughter's happiness, she knew this was the start of building something real. Not with steel and glass, but with honesty, forgiveness, and the simple, priceless gift of a second chance. Victoria Beaumont learned that the highest walls are not the ones that protect our estates, but the ones we build around our own hearts. And sometimes it takes the simple kindness of a stranger, a man with nothing to offer but his time and his heart, to show us the door. This wasn't a story about a billionaire finding love. It was a story about a mother finding her daughter again, and two families finding a connection that no amount of money could ever buy. It's a powerful reminder that the most valuable assets we will ever have are the relationships we build, the forgiveness we grant, and the courage it takes to admit when we are wrong. What did you think of Victoria's journey? Have you ever misjudged someone based on a first impression, only to realize you were completely wrong? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of human connection, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that move and inspire. Thank you for listening.